Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome and good evening. I'm Catherine Sievett, Chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture here at the Weitzman School of Design, and it's great to be with you here this evening for the third of our Spring 2024 Now Landscape Lecture Series. I wanted to just begin tonight with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the University of Pennsylvania is situated upon the ancestral homeland and territory of the Lenni and Lenape peoples. As members of an educational community, we are obligated to know the histories of dispossession that have allowed the University of Pennsylvania to grow and thrive on this vibrant terrain. As designers and thinkers, we endeavor to build in ways that lead toward justice, and we are committed to working to dismantle the ongoing consequences of settler colonialism. So this is the third, as noted, of our landscape series this semester, curated by our very own Nick Pevsner, who is an assistant professor of landscape architecture here at the school and a faculty fellow here in the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy. Everything this series is really looking at questions of energy, but of course, energy affects everything, as does our sun. I think one thing we might hear tonight from our very esteemed guests, we're very excited to have Juan José Terrasa-Soler from Marvel Architects joining us from Puerto Rico, which is very exciting, traveled the farthest this semester to join us. But thinking, one thing that I think is really great for us to consider are the climate impacts of the Great Acceleration. So I think something that we hear about, that massive consumption of fossil fuels since the 1950s, which has entangled itself with the Great Divergence, which is a term coined by the writer Timothy Noah, which is the widening chasm of inequality between the super rich and the ultra poor. So grand challenges like these, and thinking about community, energy, ecology, and social function, I think we'll hear very much about this evening from Juan Jose. This will demand diverse minds, diverse input, and new tools to gather and engage collective minds. So with that, I'd like to welcome Nick to the podium to introduce Juan Jose. And thank you all again for being here.
Thank you, Catherine. It's my great pleasure today to welcome Jose Juan to Penn. As Catherine mentioned, Jose Juan is a partner at the design office, Marvel Architects and Landscape Architects now, in large part thanks to him. He is also a founding faculty member of the Master in Landscape Architecture degree program at the Universidad Politécnica of Puerto Rico in San Juan, where he has taught design studios, environmental systems, and landscape architectural theory since 2007. Jose Juan also serves on the board of directors of Resilient Power Puerto Rico, an incredible nonprofit organization that we'll hear about today that has installed dozens of decentralized solar energy microgrids at community centers all across Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, which you'll remember devastated Puerto Rico in 2017. And then Jose Juan and I first met back in 2018 when I was part of the UPenn contingent teaching studios in Puerto Rico after the hurricane. I was leading a landscape studio alongside David Gouverneur and Allison Lassiter, Ariel Vasquez, who's here today, and Nando Micale, who were all teaching planning studios. And then during our visit to Puerto Rico, during a lecture series we had all organized at Universidad Politécnica, Jose Juan gave our students a brilliant introduction to the geology, the hydrology, and the ecology of San Juan, while introducing them to the challenges of the badly damaged energy grid. At that time, starting soon after the hurricane, Resilient Power Puerto Rico had already been active in installing decentralized solar microgrids across the island, operating out of Marvel's offices in San Juan, or I guess Marvel's offices, if it's the San Juan location, Marvel in New York, Marvel in San Juan, right? Resilient Power Puerto Rico had been merging donated equipment with philanthropic funding and with technical design expertise from the office to build a bottom-up energy system in real time. Under the executive directorship of Jose Juan, it went on to expand its efforts of constructing community solar hubs across the island, expanding energy access through physical projects as well as design, digital tools. And so in the UPenn studio, which was called Landscapes of Resilience, Designing for Transition Amid Recovery, students learned a ton from Resilient Power Puerto Rico's work, and inspired by this work, went on to imagine and design resilient community hubs that could operate in both fair weather, during blue skies, and during emergencies, provisioning all sorts of social infrastructural services. But while some of us have been busy theorizing a decentralized renewable energy system and its contribution to energy democracy, for the last 6+ years, our PPR has actually been building it. Jose Juan received his master's degrees in ecology from University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, in environmental studies from Yale, and in landscape architecture from Harvard University. His lecture tonight is titled Caribbean Infrastructural Landscapes for Climate Change. With that, Jose Juan, welcome.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, the School of Design, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me get all this stuff out of my pockets. All right. Yes, you're at the right place. No, this is not the Department of Astrophysics, but this image here is just to remind us that energy is really the currency of the universe. Everything is energy, right? We don't think too much about this because by high school, we're supposed to know this. It's a simple fact. And also because of all the social structures and meanings around energy. But this is the fundamental fact. This is the currency of the universe. By the way, this is the galaxy cluster in Perseus. Any astronomers or amateur astronomers? No. Every single spot, almost every single spot that you see there is a galaxy, not a star. Okay. So these are collections of thermonuclear plants very high up there in the sky. And down here on Earth, of course, the two most fundamental ecological processes are the flow of energy and the cycling of materials. Those are the two most fundamental processes that make possible life on Earth. And landscape can be thought of as a collection of these ecosystems. And well, of course, those two fundamental processes are the essence of landscape, the flow of energy and the cycling of materials. And those processes make life possible in all landscapes, in all ecosystems. This is Los Picachos at El Yunque National Forest in northeastern Puerto Rico. I've taken Nick there some time back. And here, the important thing is to see that it's hard to see, but the ocean is beyond there. So the connections between these ecosystems that you can think of as green power plants that are on top of this mountain, right, connecting with the ecosystems in the coast are incredibly important for all life in tropical systems. Now, we can take these fundamental processes and understand them at every single scale, even at the smallest scale, human scale, human environments. And for me, in my career and for our practice at Marvel, it has been a driver to think about how these fundamental processes can be inserted and augmented, intensified in all the work that we do, right? In a small home, in a large landscape, at all scales. So that work of thinking of how to do it, how to insert these fundamental processes and intensify, make them work, permeate all the work that we do. And I think that in doing that, we try to make human environment climate ready, right? Because the obstacles or the challenges that climate change brings to us in many ways have to do with how we manage the flow of energy and the cycling of materials. So after Hurricane Maria, which was a tremendous shock, we started to think back to the level of the smallest human environment, the home and the landscape around the home, and how you inject those processes and you recover or intensify those processes at that scale. And thinking again and again about the domestic ecosystem and how those fundamental processes express themselves at that scale. So you also start thinking about strategies for resilience and how can you make the basic or satisfy the basic human needs, thinking about those processes and reinventing, redesigning homes and home environments that are sustainable, but also affordable. So we began this quest of trying to design the perfect home for tropical environments where energy and the cycling of materials are important. And of course, the fundamental thing here is plugging into the local flows of energy, right? Not the global flows, the local flows of energy. So in Puerto Rico, that means solar, of course, what means wind. It could also mean ocean waves. It could also mean OTEC. So all of these technologies are available, and it's a matter of how we implement them in our projects, in trying to arrive at these sustainable communities that are also resilient and able to confront the challenges of climate change. So this is one of those exercises. I'm going to go quickly through that. Of course, going back to fundamental ideas that might sound funny, but you can identify in colonial buildings, right, of 400 years ago in Old San Juan. So in a way, it's reinventing the wheel with modern technology. This is another one. This is called Casa Morivivi. Morivivi is the sensitive plant. You touch the plant and leaflets close. So this house, this design is intended to be open and then to close as well. This is the closed version. And again, it's about energy flows and the cycling of materials that makes this home resilient and able to withstand harsh conditions. It's a modular design, so you can essentially build whole communities with these ideas. And again, it works under flood conditions, under dry conditions. And this is, we built two of the first version that I show you. The design also includes green infrastructure in the back, and this is just right after a rainstorm and is functioning very well. We have also come to understand landscape as infrastructure for a while now. And you all remember this classic paper, right, from 1996, Infrastructural Landscape and Landscape as Infrastructure. It was an inspiration for me when I was in design school. And it is important to view it this way because, after all, infrastructure is the way that we socially plug into the flow of energy and the cycling of materials. So infrastructure is another way of saying the different mechanisms and ways in which our society is plugged into those natural ecological processes. Now, we come to understand that and appreciate infrastructure when disaster happens. And in Puerto Rico, we've been, not only after the hurricane, but even before, we've been looking at the climate challenges and climate change. And I was actually in the first Council on Climate Change in Puerto Rico that prepared this report on the left. I was specifically looking at the tourism industry impacts at that time. I was at the tourism company. But we've been thinking about this for a while in Puerto Rico. And then in September 20th of 2017, Maria struck Puerto Rico, as you know. And I can tell you that for me, it's the most horrendous experience that I have ever had. And I'm sorry, still emotional about it. Because, we had a tremendous loss, almost 3,000 lives in a few days. Right? Not necessarily directly from the impact of the winds or the flood, but the consequences of losing energy, communication, transportation, and especially for those sensitive populations that need, all sorts of medical equipment and energy for that medical equipment to function. So the impacts were were horrendous. And of course, the energy grid pretty much disappeared. What you see there to the right, light up, is the few areas in the metropolitan area of San Juan that have power. And this image tells you a lot about climate justice and injustice, and the haves and the have-nots, right? Because most of the wealth in Puerto Rico is concentrated in the metro area, where people can have the luxury of having emergency power plants and such. So our response was to, first of all, sit down and say what's going on here, and how can we react. And we created Resilient Power Puerto Rico. Well, the founders are Jonathan Marvel and Cristina Roy, two Puerto Ricans living in New York. And we thought that the fastest way of helping Puerto Rico was to creating these energy hubs in community centers where most people could benefit from those interventions. And the typical system is a 5 kW system, 20 solar panels, 2 batteries, and the electrical system, enough to be able to have power for a refrigerator and basic illumination. That is the basic setup. So this slide says that over 40, we're close to 50 different community hubs or solar hubs around the island, including the offshore islands of Culebra and Vieques. And our first installation was in a community called Caño Martín Peña. Here you see the old city is in the tip of this island here, the colonial settlement. And Santurce is the closest that we have to New York. It's a relatively dense urban. And the commercial district is over here, University of Puerto Rico. And Caño Martín Peña is this community that developed in the Great Migration from the countryside to the city in the 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s. What we could call informal development or non-governmentally sponsored development, however you want to call it, around the shores of this natural channel, the Martín Peña Channel, that connects San Juan Bay with the San Jose Lagoon. This is all a large estuarine system of lagoons and canals, all of them mangrove lined originally. So the settlement around the Caño Martín Peña occurred over time, essentially filling up that channel and cutting down the mangrove and establishing homes there. So it was important because that's one of the highest density areas in San Juan. And so we established 4 community centers there, community hubs, solar hubs in community centers that already were established. We also established centers, particularly in the southeastern part of Puerto Rico, Maunabo, Naguabo, where the impact of the hurricane was the strongest. And throughout the island, in Loíza, Yabucoa, Ponce, Macao, Culebra, Vieques. This one in particular is in Vieques, which is my favorite island, just east of the mainland of Puerto Rico. And the point is not only providing these energy systems, but also helping the communities understand their vulnerabilities and helping them create their own systems and energy systems and their own organizational systems that help them be more prepared for similar situations in the future. So community engagement is all part of this work. And these are the 4 that we put together in Caño Martín Peña. The idea here is that there are also interventions in the urban landscape that have connection with each other and that provide this service to the whole community as efficiently as possible. This is one of the community centers, Buena Vista. You can see the solar panels there on top. And this is the essence of it, is providing energy especially at night when people can get together, organize, and recover from the impact of a storm or an emergency. So it's about this creation of community and enabling social networks that already existed, but maybe improving them and making the space for them to be able to confront the situation. Education, be able to provide services to children, after school programs that are very important in these communities that are disadvantaged and don't have access to the best resources possible. We also produce a series of web-based tools that also help communities assess their own condition, their own vulnerability, but also enable them to prepare proposals to be funded by organizations to create their own microgrids and their own energy systems. By the way, most of these projects were funded through donations from individuals, other foundations. So this is all money that came from donations that was able to do this work. So this is the way that the tool was organized some couple years back. It's in the process of being rethought and relaunched. So this is a look ahead of what it's going to be like. The illumination or illumination part is essentially to enable communities to create their proposals for energy systems. And the energy calculator helps a community center or a whole community to measure their energy needs and assess their needs to be able to fulfill them in an efficient manner. So we strongly believe in this, right? You have to design the future, and we do that both in our practice at Marvel and certainly at RPPR, Resilient Power Puerto Rico as well. The way we work is in a collaborative way with communities. So the assessment of needs, the drafting of proposals, and the funding and creation of projects is all done in a community design framework. And the idea is to eventually create an island-wide ecosystem that can support communities in need throughout the islands. And that's the way that the effort has been growing through time. Now, solar has become popular in Puerto Rico after the hurricanes. Everybody now wants to have their own solar system in their own homes and so forth. And there are incentives to do that. And also commercial applications of solar energy. And of course, that presents design issues, right? This is Salinas in southern Puerto Rico. And this is a commercial solar production center. And it's hard to see in this picture, but if you look back here, I don't know if you see all those windmills. That's another project that is in Santa Isabel, town next door, closer to Ponce. This is the southern coast. So these are, important issues because this particular system, commercial system, is in the best agricultural land that we have in South Puerto Rico, very close to a community. So this is an active area of research for us, and I imagine that for some of you as well. How do you do this in a sustainable way, in a way that these renewable energy landscapes are socially and ecologically integrated to community and context? So I'm not going to answer that. That's for another lecture. But so that side is the energy side, which is how we plug into the energy flows in the landscape. The other side is how we plug into the cycling of materials in the landscape. And that has to do a lot with how the whole urban fabric is put together. So coming back to El Caño, Martín Peña, this is an area that is constantly flooded. There are issues of handling water and the hydrology. And in the context of the greater San Juan metropolitan area, you can see why, right? This, again, Old San Juan is at the tip of the islet here. The international airport is here. And then you have the all central development, which expanded this way because this used to be the road that connected San Juan to Ponce, the second largest city in the south. And then large developments in the 60s and 70s all around that central core. You still see remnants of nature trying to survive in between, right? And you have all sorts of conditions that are in the context of the San Juan Bay Estuary watershed, which is what you see here in yellow. And again, is this connected system of lagoons, mangrove forests, and San Juan Bay, all with different levels of intensity of use and land use around them. So you get this condition, urbanizations that were built in the 50s and 60s, traditional homes at the time, that have seen a trend of decreasing green cover, right? You see that the expansion of families, the need for additional cars, so you could cut down the tree and add some additional area in the along the street. So, and then all the conditions where still the forest has been preserved and is there with hydrological connections, and even some instances as this, because this hill in particular was protected by the government because it was a communication center. So it was never developed or cut down. So a variety of conditions, and even this condition, which is San Jose Lagoon, which once you're there in some sort of a boat, you lose the sense that you are in the metro area, and you think that you're elsewhere. But San Juan originally was a big concatenation of wetlands, all different wetlands, mangroves, herbaceous wetlands, all sorts of wetlands associated to the Rio Piedras, which is the main freshwater, but also all along the coast. Because, as you know, freshwater rides on top of salt water because of the density difference. So freshwater that is coming through the ground comes to the surface close to the coast. So you have this band of wetlands naturally all along the northern shore of Puerto Rico. And it was really concentrated here in Santurce. The expansion of San Juan began the year before the Spanish-American War, which was in 1898. In 1897, the Spanish were already tearing down some of the city walls that surrounded completely Old San Juan. And this is it's called the land door that gave access from the land side, and it's being torn down for the expansion of the city. And I'm not gonna go into the urban history of San Juan too much, but just to let you know how quickly this happened. From 1950 to 70, just in 20 years, look at the change. The black, of course, is the urban cover. So, and so happens with the rest of Puerto Rico in a way. In the lower map, you see land cover in the 70s, in the upper in the 90s, and there are two dramatic changes here. This color, brown color, is agricultural land changing into forest because of the abandonment of agriculture, and then the expansion of the metro area, and then, creating tentacles all around where infrastructure is located. So the expansion of the metro area, the centralization of the metro area, the abandonment of agricultural land, that's what you get from the 70s to the 90s, and it has continued up to the present. And a lot of it is this, right? This is urban metabolism. So is the production of concrete out of trees. So the big question is, what do you do? How do you retrofit in a way this urban condition so that you're more resilient, so that you can face climate change challenges, with all the social complexities and so forth? And for me, part of the answer is to use green infrastructure as a device to plug into local energy flows, but also a device to plug into local material cycles. So we've been working on that. And green infrastructure for me is a cyborg, all right? Elizabeth Meyer wrote once that all landscape is a cyborg, but green infrastructure is this delicate combination of living things and mechanical things working together. So to make it work, it has to be well calibrated, and the processes that connect them has to be understood and designed. So simple principles, you know, the basic ecological functionality that has to be there. The life, yeah, you saw the Buddha in the corner. Life, water, soil, air connection has to be designed and thought out. And of course, soil is king. You that have been here for a while know that landscape architecture is less about selection of plant materials. Well, I hope that you know that by now. And it's more about space, but it's also about soil. It turns out that if soil is not well designed, your project fails. And any intervention that is green infrastructure is going to fail if the soil is not well designed. And of course, this is part of it too. It's trying to inject that functionality. And in this case, you know, the material is water. We're talking about the hydrological cycle. So it's about introducing hydrological functionality in the urban space. And in San Juan, for example, most storms or most daily precipitations are below 1 inch. So you have ample opportunity to handle that kind of water with green infrastructure. And I'm going to show you a few projects now that address this aspect of the material cycles, particularly the water cycle or the hydrological cycle, as we do landscape architecture for that. And again, coming back to Caño Martín Peña, you know where it is. This is what it looks like. Again, this is this land mangrove line channel, very densely inhabited in all the surroundings. And we were contracted to build pocket parks along this channel. There's a plan that has been over 20 years in the works, and there's even a public corporation dedicated to pushing this project, which is the dredging and ecological restoration of this channel and the relocation within the same communities of the families that would be impacted by the dredging of the canal. The canal is designed to be dredged at 100 feet wide and 10 feet deep. So that means that a lot of the families that are currently there are going have to move, and they've already been doing that. The Enlace or the Caño Martín Peña project includes a land trust. So the residents are not owners of the land, they're owners of their homes. And the land trust is in charge of developing additional housing for these, new housing for these families to move and remain within their communities. So it's a very complicated project. I won't go into the details, but our project here was to design these pocket parks that are going to be located in the footprint of the dredging project. And they're thought of as temporary parks while the master plan is eventually constructed. And the master plan here calls for a boulevard on the northern side of the canal, another one on the southern side, and a series of parks along it. And our parks were to occupy areas that where families have been relocated already and turn them into public space and social space. So again, this was community design, and we met with the community many times through the programming, schematic, and construction documentation. Here is one of them, Buena Vista, and the idea is to introduce green infrastructure that can also alleviate flooding, but also jumpstart the recovery of the mangrove that had been lost here. So to do that, We had to study, of course, the hydrology of the place, how the water functions in each of these 10 sites. And the plant palette selection, species that eventually will become part of a mature mangrove forest in northern Puerto Rico. And these are some of the ideas of the parks. There's a design language that is there already. These gabion walls are being used by the community to mark the areas for the parks. So we integrated those into the design language of the parks. These communities, because they do not historically did not receive any support from the government, they have little public space or services. So these areas are intended to provide those services, at least in the short term. Conceptual plan for another one. And again, incorporating local language, design language in terms of materials, but also the recreational sports space and green infrastructure all around these little parks. This other project is called Parque Bechara. It's in what used to be the San Juan landfill. And before it was a landfill, it was the crematorium. You know what a crematorium is? Crematorium is where you burn waste. The crematorium used to be here. And if you look at aerial photographs from the 30s, you see the smoke plume coming out of that corner. So eventually the municipality of San Juan started to landfill over here. And now you have 3 hills that are part of the landscape of San Juan that are the old sanitary landfill. It was closed because of EPA regulations. It just arrived at its maximum extension, and it is located right across what I consider to be the neural node of the metropolitan area, because it's where the north, south, and east-west major transportation corridors connect. So the east-west and the north-south, they just come together here. And not only that, but here you have the famous Plaza Las Americas, which is the largest mall in all of the Caribbean. And it's sort of like a huge commercial center. Everybody knows where it is. Anywhere, and everybody goes through there at one point or another. So you see in the background, when you look north, these 3 hills that are out there. So the idea was to how you integrate or you inject ecological functioning into this landscape. By the way, I said that it was a sanitary landscape, but landfill, but it is not a sanitary landfill. There's no bottom liner here. So the waste is in contact with the water. So the leachate out of this landfill is spewing into the water. Because there's a top liner, but not a bottom liner, because it's so old. So how do you do that? How you inject that ecology back? So we studied it in many ways. There's an industrial side to it in the west, toward the left, where the old water treatment plant was. And there's a more natural side to the east, where actually a natural reserve is there. So we studied, how this place could be an interface between the industrial and the natural, how the hydrology of the place worked, circulation around it, collection of surface runoff, and then the sectional qualities of the transformation between a barren green surface to a naturalized ecosystem resembling a mangrove swamp. It is also a visual landmark, so because they're so high and they're so visible. And part of the idea was to make this space usable, to have programming, to have even structures on top of them. And they're definitely a visual challenge on how you make this attractive in one way or another at the same time that it's ecologically functioning. So this was a conceptual project, and we got to programming 3 different phases of intervention to achieve public use and ecological functioning. But unfortunately, it was not finally funded by the municipality, so it just ended there. And the next one is called El Portal at El Yunque National Forest. El Portal is a visitor center. This place was built in the late 90s, 1996, at the edge of the forest. You see that green patch there, that's the national forest, some 29,000 acres of it. Mostly over here, there are 3 peaks, El Yunque Peak, El Toro, and Pico del Este. And also you can see here the old naval base, Roosevelt Roads, in the eastern end. But El Yunque is the only tropical rainforest in the entire US forest system. And it is also unique in that it had, since the 90s, this visitor center that most national forests don't have, because national forests are really for research, wood production, a little bit of recreation perhaps, but that's not the original mission of the US Forest Service. Different from the Park Service, which is another thing, is conservation of history, landscapes, and recreation. So this facility is quite unique, and you get to it from the State Road 191, which is this one that comes from the north and traverses the forest. This is the administrative center of the forest, which was not part of the project. But you come in, and there's a ticket booth, and this is pre our intervention and pre-Maria also. But the original building is cruciform. There's a main gallery that is lower, and then upper courtyard and pavilions, and then a small structure here that connects with the main structure through a pedestrian bridge that takes you across the canopy of the forest. So even before Hurricane Maria, this building had numerous issues in terms of humidity, mold. The lower part were offices for the Forest Service employees. They, put a suit in the courts against the government because of the conditions of work. There were many problems. And then the hurricane hit and essentially destroyed the building, the site. The roofs of the pavilions on top were blown away, and it was a big mess. And the Forest Service took the opportunity to rethink the role of this visitor center and convert it into a community hub. So part of the redesign was changing this into strictly an exhibition space and offices into a community center. This is another view after the hurricane. And this is how it looks today. Essentially, we redesigned the whole landscape and site and also the buildings. Eventually, it achieved LEED Gold certification, and it achieved the highest number of points for site design. And there were other programs that were introduced. For example, we introduced a plaza at the entry that was not there before. This was just a simple trail that connected to the Portalito, because we thought that the plaza was needed as a gathering space. And some of the ideas, the design ideas for this space is a nature culture gradient as you approach the buildings. The Forest Service said originally that you had to use only native species, not only native of Puerto Rico, but native of the forest, which was exceedingly difficult to do. We argued successfully with the Forest Service that the building was already there and that there's vegetation there that is naturalized, that has been in Puerto Rico for 400 years, and that is reminiscent of the iconic idea of Caribbean landscape. Why can we use that close to the building? So eventually they agreed, and we were able to think about this as a procession of habitats as you go closer. The other design idea or large design idea was to use this plaza think about this plaza as a gap in the forest, as an opening, which is also an archetypal landscape for gathering for humans since before history. These are some of the species. Ortegón is native to the forest, but it's native to northeastern Puerto Rico. And this one also, other one is called firebush, which is also native. So we designed the whole experience from the beginning. The entry to the visitor center had a different rock that was not native to that area of Puerto Rico. We designed the design and all of the entry experience. And the plaza, that is the first experience of the project. This project was design build, but also there was significant vegetation already there. So thinking about what you kept and what you took away was very important since the beginning. There's also the introduction of, and we'll see it later, an accessible trail to the right. There's a depression there between the parking area and the buildings. And we took the opportunity to introduce this accessible trail, which is the only accessible trail in the entire national forest, in the 29,000 acres of forest. This section through the plaza area, you start seeing here the bioretention cells, which I'll talk about, and then the drop in the topography towards the accessible trail. And then in elevation, you see the pedestrian bridge that connects the entry structure with the rest of the campus. Now, a big challenge here was the managing that cycling of water, right? Because the federal rules, since the construction of this place, require that you had to manage on site the 95th percentile storm, which means that most storms have to be managed on site. And this site, with its huge parking, the way they managed stormwater was just in the conventional way, just intakes and a huge 6 feet diameter pipe down the hill and then into the closest stream. So to be able to handle all this water, and remember, this is a rainforest, El Yunque receives around 200 inches of rain per year in the top part of the forest. A little less down here, but it's still a lot of water. So the green infrastructure was the device that we used, and we created these bioretention cells that are essentially empty pools with engineered soils and then vegetation that is capable to sustain the dry, wet cycles, which is not an easy task to do, right? Because, I wrote a paper some years ago about precisely what vegetation could do that in Puerto Rico. And this is still an experiment in many ways, because some of the vegetation that we selected did well in some parts, but not so well in others of this system of bioretention cells. Here you see the plaza, the entry plaza, and the bosque of Cecropia. And then to the right, you see some of the bioretention cells that in here also function as a retaining wall of the incoming access. So this is the dirty part of construction. This is the construction of those bioretention cells. As you can see, they're 6, 7 feet deep at the end of the day, and quite ugly during construction. And this is what they look now. El Portal was finished in late 2021 and opened to the public early 2022. And since then, more than 2 years now, it has worked flawlessly, even during the strongest storm. So the system has been working as designed. This is another series of bioretention cells in the upper part of the parking. And then the site slopes down the hill. So you have these parking decks going down the hill. And then we have bioretention cells at each level capturing the water. The entrance, the plaza again. This is the tree, and the reason for selecting this tree is that Jagrumo or Cecropia is a pioneer species. So these are trees that you find at the openings of forests. When a huge tree, goes down, it opens a gap in the forest, and these are the first ones to come up. They grow fast, and they tell you, this is an opening in the forest. They're sort of silver on the underside of the leaf. So when the wind blows, they change color, or apparently change color, giving you a nice effect as well. So you see the bioretention cell there to the right. It's part of the plaza. Then this bridge connects you to the main gallery, which you see here from the upper pavilions. And between the main gallery and the upper pavilions, there's this transitional space that is where there's a water feature that in the original design, they tried to imitate a natural stream in the forest, and we moved away from that. We got inspired by the small dams that you find throughout the forest, and these are dams that were built since time immemorial by communities trying to get water to their communities. So in our design, it's more like these small dams that you find in this water feature. Then in the upper pavilion, we built this canopy all around because there was no way of protecting yourself from the rain in the upper pavilions. And the deck is all pavers on elevated pavers that percolate. So rainwater gets into there, and that whole area is essentially a large basin where rainwater is circulated in the water feature. So the water in the water feature is actually rain recirculated from the upper pavilions. This is the exhibition space. There's a full featured kitchen, cafeteria. And then on the sides of the larger pavilion on top, there's sunken gardens. And then the accessible trail, as you can see, the average slope is like 30%, something crazy like that. So the design, had to snake because it had to be compliant. So I had to snake back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, all the way down. And it goes again between the main plaza to the left and the main building. So it goes under the pedestrian bridge. And here's some shots of it. From it, you can see the buildings, the pavilion buildings on top. There are interpreted signs all along. Lots of people usually here. And then during the excavation for the bioretention cells, we found these boulders, and we reused the boulders to create the accessible trail. So here's my trusty civil engineer picture there, who, by the way, is my best friend from high school. So great guy. And he's one of the few civil engineers that you can fight with and say, I'm the landscape architect, you are the engineer, you say what I say, kind of thing. No, he's a great guy. So because this was a design build project, we were flexible enough that we could change the design. So instead of using concrete retention walls, we changed the design to use these boulders that were found on site, and then reduce the carbon footprint significantly right there alone. And this is the product. Again, I resisted using railings throughout this trail, but we had to use it in this one point. And the civil engineer said, my friend said, if you don't put a rail here, you're risking your license, you know that. And eventually we put the railing. So, you know, it's this lush tropical ecosystem that still have these plants that are not native to the forest, but are in everyone's idea of Caribbean landscape. And these are the plants that I saw in my grandmother's garden that taught me what a Puerto Rican garden is. So why are we not supposed to have them here? Then there's a secondary trail that is not strictly accessible, is done with fine gravel that is tamped and relatively stable, but I wouldn't call it accessible. And there are art installations throughout that secondary trail as well. And this is the a view of the main gallery from the upper pavilions. Now to end, I'm just going to talk about two projects that are on the boards right now. One is in Vieques, again, my favorite island ever. And Vieques and Culebra are two offshore island municipalities. Vieques is the one that I prefer because there's a layer of culture there that you can perceive very well, restaurants and a little bit of nightlife and so forth. Culebra is more about the beach and that's it. But Vieques has this layer of culture to it. And here you can see the old Spanish town in Vieques, which is called Isabel II. Is up here. And you can also see the airport. There's a small airport as well. And the Spanish had a tough time here because the French wanted to take the island. Actually, there's a lot of French history in Vieques. And the Spanish, at the end of the 19th century, built this fort to, you know, hush away the French and try to protect Vieques. So our project here is essentially to redesign the central square, which is this block here. This is the church. The city hall is here. And then our project also has to do with the oldest school, which is this building here, which was built in 1907. And this is the condition now. There's still trees remaining, but it is a pretty rough plaza. You know, it's hot and not a whole lot of shade. That's a city hall in the back. And so the idea again is to, you know, thinking about climate change and climate challenges, to introduce a lot more of shade in Vieques. Vieques is relatively dry, very hot during the summer. It's really nice in the winter months, but in the summer it's pretty hot. So this being the main meeting place of this island, you know, the idea is really to green the space and provide shade. Again, this is on the board still. We're still working on the documents. And this is the school. The school is a historical building in the National Register. So the idea here is to create a space that is available for the community and create a community hub, which will be a solar hub as well. There's a mixture of programs here. There's a small agricultural market in the front, small cafe. There's a computer room, information room for the community in the back, meeting rooms on the other side, and then emergency energy through a solar system. And then regreening. Part of the design also is bringing the elevation of this street up, so you can have the same elevation across the street and connect more readily the building and the plaza. And then finally, in southwestern Puerto Rico, in the town of Guanica, in this valley, this agricultural valley, specifically in this area over here, used to be the Guanica Lagoon, which was drained in 1955 to give way to more agricultural land. And that was the largest freshwater body in Puerto Rico. Very significant habitat for all sorts of flora and fauna, but particularly to migrant birds from North America that make the trek to South America and stop in the Caribbean. So this used to be a very important habitat. So we're helping a community group called Protectores de Cuencas to re-inundate this area and recreate the lagoon. By the way, the town is here. This is the center of town of Guanica, and there are two communities that would be next door to the Restore Lagoon. Now, this has been an uphill battle for the community group they've been at this for 10, 15 years, because the farmers are against this idea, of course. So in the last 2 or 3 years, there's now more of an agreement that this could be beneficial for the farmers as well. So they finally have agreed, and that there was even division between the government. I mean, the Secretary of Agriculture was fighting in public with the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources, because the Secretary of Agriculture was opposed to this idea, and the Secretary of Natural Resources was in favor. So this is the plan. But it's also not just the ecological restoration part, and again, reestablishing these material cycles here for these communities, but also providing new recreation space that had not existed before. So the ability to use, to have trails around. The idea is also to create these islands for migrant birds that would be isolated from, feral cats, rats, and etc. So they can be viable habitat for these migrant birds. And to also create, again, opportunities for recreation, appreciation of nature, but also a community hub. And you can see an image of what it's there now versus what we're proposing on top. Again, the same, an existing view below, and what we're proposing on top. This is an existing community called El Fuig, and there's a space there for a park that would be related, maybe used as a base for, ecological tourism, environmental tourism in this area. The cows, of course, have to be there, because if not, the farmers would kill us. So, so there's this use of, growing hay for the cow farmers that still will be there. And of course, there are challenges on how you can do that and at the same time maintain water quality, maintain ecological balance in this created or recreated ecosystem. But it is something that is being, of course, thought about and looked into. And that's it. Thank you very much. Don't know if we have time for questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Jose Juan. So yeah, we have a little bit of time for questions. So please start formulating your questions. While you do that, maybe I can kick it off with one of mine. And so thank you, Jose Juan. I appreciate the focus on systems, the energy systems, hydrological systems, ecological systems. You started with the Gary Strang quote of landscape as infrastructure. That essay talks about, instead of hiding infrastructure, which has been the charge for landscape architects, since the beginning of the industrial age, where are the opportunities for showcasing and maybe even reframing infrastructure, for designing new languages of infrastructure, for developing novel ways of elevating infrastructure's legibility. And so my question is, how is this challenge, or maybe this opportunity of legibility, especially around energy infrastructure, different in Puerto Rico, where The public legibility of the energy system is more widespread than any place else I've ever encountered, probably because you learn a lot about your energy grid when it's missing for 3 to 7 months. So yeah, how do you think about this challenge?
It is a challenge that we have embraced on several occasions. For example, the El Portal project that I show you, the stormwater infrastructure is right there in your face. You see it, and some people might think it's ugly, but I don't think it's ugly, but some people might. Actually, the architect of the Forest Service thought it was really ugly. The ecologist in the Forest Service saved the bioretention cells because they understood the function and they thought that they were fantastic. So the ecologist won. But yes, it's a challenge. It's been criticized by many. For example, the windmills that we saw, and those windmills, by the way, when you come down the highway from San Juan to Ponce, that you cross over the central mountain range and you start coming down, the first thing that you see is, the dozens of windmills. Some people find them ugly, others, myself, I like them. It's something that you find in Spain, in Europe in general, but in Spain all over the place. These windmills are part of the landscape, are part of the visual language. I think it's there's several things. There's a way in design that you can treat them, because yes, they can be eyesores sometimes. But at the same time, I think is understanding the role of that infrastructure in our lives, in the sustenance of life, and embracing that. And so we try to push the envelope, yes, every time we can, but at the same time trying to do it in a sensible way, because of course there are issues of scale, there are issues of color, and and visual impact. It is an impact when you're coming down the highway and you see the beautiful blue ocean and then these white things over there. Maybe they can be painted gray, maybe they can be painted blue, I don't know. But yes, it's definitely a challenge. And then you have communities that have different tolerance for those things, even when you try to do it in the most sensitive way.
Okay, thank you for the beautiful lecture. And my question is also about the microgrids project. The microgrids as a reaction to the Hurricane Maria, but on the picture it's just installed on the roof. I'm wondering if there is any reinforcements to enhance the durability of the system. And another my question is kind of related to next question. Like you mentioned landscape, energy infrastructure as landscape. And we all know Puerto Rican people are really creative, especially we saw lots of the informal development in the community. Is there any attempt for the local residents to make the urbanized energy infrastructure more beautiful, or change the shape, or do any interesting tries about that? Or if the infrastructure is controlled by the government and the local residents didn't have the right to modify this components of the infrastructure?
Yeah, thank you for the question. In a way, what Resilient Power Puerto Rico was trying to do was to put the control of energy and energy infrastructure in the hands of the community, and making everybody understand that that was a possibility, that you could control energy and energy infrastructure, that it was not the sole domain of the government or the rich. So in a way, the construction of these hubs is a teaching moment or a co-learning moment where we learn that we have control, over the basic, underpinnings of life, and that they can change that. Many communities, for example, have questioned the aerial infrastructure and have pushed the government to put that infrastructure underground. And actually, FEMA in another hurricane years back gave funding to construct what was called the Metropolitan Loop. And that was, the main infrastructure, the electrical infrastructure of San Juan is underground now, from 15 years back. And actually, that helped during Hurricane Maria because electricity came back in San Juan much faster than in the rest of the island. So, giving communities the power to change the way that the infrastructure looks and feels and operates is important, but also pushing the government to deal with it and manage the inappropriateness of some of the infrastructure that we have now is important as well.
Thank you so much. A quick follow-up question about that. You showed the overview map of sort of this look into the future of having these small scale community hubs interconnected. And so I'm curious if that would also be sort of a community / governmental partnership. And then I'm also thinking a lot about some of these experimental solar technologies wherein things are on vertical facades or different materials can be painted with solar ready films or other materials, and how that also might then trickle down. And I'm not sure if this has been a larger sort of societal conversation, but how that might then trickle down to what you were asking about, just kind of like community engagement and actually making of some of these energy capturing spaces and places.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. For the first part, yes, there has to be a cooperation, between communities and government, because the electrical system in Puerto Rico is a completely centralized system. So there are these power plants usually on the coast, and this completely interconnected system that demonstrated to be a weakness after Maria because you couldn't restart the system. You depended on the whole system being interconnected again to essentially being able to produce energy, which is ridiculous. So decentralization, regionalization of energy production and consumption is definitely one of the main ideas here. But it has to be, if you want to be efficient, we will have to use the distribution system that there is. So yes, there has to be a cooperation for sure. The other question, there are many groups beyond RPPR in Puerto Rico that have been looking at energy for a long time. One of them is Casa Pueblo in Adjuntas in the center of Puerto Rico. They actually have been looking at this way before RPPR did. And one of the interesting things that they've done is that they, for one, have produced their own solar lightning pole that that is contained with its own batteries and so forth. So they're thinking about technology as well, produced in Puerto Rico, that could be used. And again, those kind of technologies in the Vieques project, for example, we're trying to use solar public illumination as well, because at the end of the day, that's what you need. You need those public spaces to be energized and to be lighted. But yes, there's experimentation. There's the University of Puerto Rico has an engineering campus on the western side of Mayagüez, and they have professors there that have specifically been working on trying to adapt existing technology and creating new technology for renewables for quite some time.
Thank you. This is such a good timing because some of us are actually trying to regenerate mangrove in studio. And you have the exact project in the urban space in the Caribbean. So I was wondering if you could walk us through like the main steps of what are the main important steps to properly regenerate a mangrove?
Well, there are four mangrove species in Puerto Rico. There's the red mangrove, which is actually the one that is at the forefront, and it has these beautiful arching roots that are very architectural. And that's a mangrove that resists or is able to withstand the mechanical energy of the ocean. So you find that right in the ocean, in the water. And that's one of the hardest ones to reproduce, because there's a fruit that is like a cigar that comes down of the tree, and that gets, by gravity, gets plunged into the sand, and from there springs this new tree. But there has been successful and not so successful efforts to regenerate mangroves, planting them directly. There are different techniques, and they're in the literature. You can find them. They use PVC piping to protect the seedling, all sorts of things. Then behind the red mangrove, there are two other species, the black and the white mangrove, which actually do not tolerate mechanical distress, but are more tolerant to salt. So, those extremely salty conditions in the evaporation plains behind the mangrove, the white and black mangroves tolerate. And then there's what is called the green mangrove or bottom mangrove, which is more really of an upland species. So the four species, along with other species behind them, form that coastal ecosystem. And it's hard to have one without the other, because the white and black, for example, if they don't have the red mangrove in front, they die because they don't tolerate the mechanical stress of the waves.
I see several questions. We have time for maybe one more. So maybe what we can do is collect these four and then leave it to Jose Juan to answer. So
you have my email, so be happy to.
Thank you for the lecture, firstly. So my question, first one, is, yes. So in most of these Caribbean nations or the Latin American regions, we see they are very ecologically rich. They have like mountains, waterfront shores, like collecting a lot of water. And then there is the urban infrastructure that has developed in like corners and pieces. So have you seen any example, or maybe the example where you had like a sports ground, some community, and then mangroves coming in? What is that edge condition like? How do you solve that? Like the three systems merge together and do not stay like separate pieces? And I forgot my second question.
Well, those edge conditions. What? Oh, okay. Well, let me just say that those edge conditions are from a landscape point of view and from an ecological point of view, are the most interesting condition that you can find. It's just a lot of things happening there. Thank you.
So, hi, Jose Juan. My name is Ben. I'm Costa Rican Floridian. And when you were talking about in El Portal, which I've been to and loved everything about it, about the aspect of having to balance native species with introduced species with the gardens that, for me, my abuela also, having the pothos and the monstera and everything. How do we, in some of these like ecologically like very fragile regions, how do we balance, I guess, that element of putting in the plants that I guess might be expected by garden systems set up hundreds of years ago with the native ecosystem we want to show?
Hello. My question is actually about disasters in Puerto Rico, and thinking about how disasters make infrastructure legible, which Nick had alluded to. And and I'm thinking about infrastructure in after kind of reading Pierre Bélanger, so that like a decade later from the essay that you referenced, but thinking about, there is a certain opportunism that comes with disasters, right? There's energy that comes with things being legible and things that don't work being legible. So I'm wondering for you as a practice, for you and your practice, whether you have things in your back pocket where you're like, ooh, this is really dark. I'm in a conspiracy studio, so it gets dark, but I'm wondering, like, do you have work where you're like, this is going to need to wait until the next disaster? Or like, how do you ride those waves of energy?
I thought you were going to send them to me by email or something later. I didn't quite get that. But anyway, the interstitial places, those boundaries are really the most interesting because in the tropics, there's so much growth all the time. I mean, there's everything happening. The urban condition sometimes enriches in terms of nutrients those natural ecosystems. So there are a lot of things happening that you don't find anywhere else except in those interstitial, I have trouble with that word, interstitial conditions or boundary conditions. So yeah, they're extremely interesting. The question about the cultural landscapes, it's cultural. It's something that changes with time. But most species that we associate with the tropical Caribbean have been there for 400 years. The Spanish really like to move things around, and they brought plants from everywhere. They brought panapen from Asia, and it was supposed to be a food source for slaves. So there's a whole history there. Plants are culture, right? And the way we use plants is cultural. So my point with the Forest Service is that this is a cultural intervention. We're not trying to restore the forest here, people. We're trying to restore a cultural site. So treat it as culture, and they got the message. And going back to your question, it's hard to. It's after a disaster of this magnitude, it's crazy. There are many things happening. There's the immediate needs. There are the long-term needs that you don't have to think about then. So you're trying to, at the basic level, save as many lives as possible, and at the same time keep going with the economy of the place and the social life of the place. So, and then you have all of these external forces that some of them, most of them, I would say, are genuinely try to help. Others not so much. And then the way you rebuild, it has an impact on the long term. So you have to solve immediate problems, but at the same time, not trash it for the future. So it's a very difficult balancing act. And sometimes the government, in the case of Maria, the Puerto Rican government did not have the capacity, because it was such an impact, to discern and to play the arbiter at those early months. So it was confusing. It was really confusing. It's later that you can sit down and think about it, and then get to learn, what this really means in terms of the importance of different elements of infrastructure, the ones that you see, the ones that you don't see. For once, for example, the aqueduct system was very resilient. So there was water almost everywhere because it was not affected that much. It was the energy system and the transmission of, huge amounts of electricity from the southern part of Puerto Rico to the north that was most impacted. So yes, you learn what is important, when and how, and at the same time, you have all these forces, trying to help, but not necessarily being coordinated, that could have a negative impact in the long term. How you manage that is very, very difficult. Our approach was always from the bottom up. So we on purpose didn't work with a government. We wanted to work with the needs of the communities because we thought that they could tell us what the real needs were. And also it's a matter of energy justice, plain and simple. But I hope that answered.
Fantastic. So we should hold it there. You all have Jose Juan's email because he volunteered to answer any other questions we didn't have time to get to. There's drinks and snacks downstairs. Please enjoy.
Amateur astrologist? Astronomer, sorry. That's what I meant. Where will you be during the path of totality? That's my first question. The second is on April 8th. But the second is, I love the two dark sky Puerto Rico possibilities, like the Puerto Rico before Maria and then after. And is there maybe some move to making Puerto Rico a dark sky nation to kind of conserve that in the way you rethink energy? You don't have to answer that now. But where will you be in the
Well, I wanted to be here, and actually not here, but probably in Erie, Pennsylvania, somewhere, right? But if I stayed, I probably would be kicked out of my office. So I can't stay for that. But thank you very much.